Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Now, this week, the patch note is a little bit delayed. I had COVID for the last kind of 2 weeks, so I just didn't have a voice really. I couldn't talk. But I'm here now. I've got all the information. It's a little bit later than I'd normally like, but let's get stuck into it. So as always with this type of video, we do two parts. The first part, we kind of look through all the official patch notes and all the things that they say in the sort of official releases. And then we take a look at the unofficial side of things. So this is basically information that they haven't included in the patch notes, or maybe of interest to you, and it's been sort of data mined out of the game. We look at multipliers and things like this. So let's take a look at the official patch notes here. 5.7 has brought some nice new changes. We've got the reserve vault. Now, for a very long time, players have been asking for, I need somewhere to put all my faction guardians. I need somewhere to put all these duplicates you're asking me to keep. And I just can't afford to keep upgrading anymore. And some people have even hit the 400 out of 400 max. I'm sitting around 250 to 280. So I've still got quite a bit to grow, but it gets very, very expensive. Now, the nice thing about the reserve vault is that it basically resets the cost back to the level 1. So effectively, it's a lot cheaper. I managed to get myself 100 slots for probably a couple of million silver. That's really, really good. Interestingly, in the game code, it's called Bathhouse. I'm not really sure why we've coded it that way, but it basically means when you put a champion in the reserve vault, you're actually putting them in the bathhouse. Now, the fact you have to take all the artifacts off is a little bit frustrating for me. It would have been nice that you can keep it as like a reserve, but in the end, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's basically an additional vault. Maybe there was some sort of coding limitations in terms of whether the master vault could continue to grow, but hey, reserve vault, effectively free upgrades for a little bit of silver, gives you an extra 100 slots. Really, really nice for a lot of players. Now, I'm going to cover the Hex debuff in the unofficial parts a little bit more detail, but I'm surprised we've made this change, but I can understand maybe why. Now, I would have thought bombs would have got more focus as a debuff itself, because so far we've had some bomb champions, but they've not really touched the bomb debuff mechanic at all. And I think here, for example, we've got Hex debuff. Now, Hex is obviously an enabling debuff. Champions that require Hex normally do a lot more powerful abilities if there is a Hex out there. We're looking at Ruel's passive, gets a double hit if there's a Hex debuff. You've got Thea's damage multiplier. You've got loads of these different things. You've got the fact that, Mithrala can petrify if there's a Hex out there. So Hex was always designed to be the debuff doesn't do anything, but, it creates powerful champion abilities. So what they've done is they basically made it so that having Hex out there for a champion that you don't deal damage to, now it does something. It deals damage. There's a few little quirks we're going to cover in the unofficial patch notes of this video. But yeah, generally, I think it helps maybe give Hex more of a place, but I don't think it's as powerful as it probably sounds. We've also got a new champion skin with Kale. Let's take a quick look at that. So we have the Masquerade, or the Scarlet Masquerade skin. I think this skin is probably one of the better ones they've done. You can see it's got like little red hues in his bracelets and his armlets. We've got like masks on his belt. It looks really cool. The blades are slightly different if we compare it to that. His blades are separated. On the new one, it's like kind of crossed over. Got some scrolls on there. Considering it's a rare champion, we don't actually know how we're going to get this skin yet. It looks really cool. Nice to see more skins coming in. Obviously, Kale being a rare, it's not a champion we use an awful lot. However, it's nice enough to have, I guess. And we have got some advanced quest changes. This is so good for me. They've changed it so that the use 1 Hydra key gives you 5 silver keys in the Doom Tower instead of 10 gems. This makes this a lot less annoying. Yes, okay, some people might not want to do Hydra that day, but hey, at least we're not losing those silver keys, which we would have lost in the previous iteration. 10 gems is nothing to me. Silver keys is where it's at. So I'm happy they made that change. Then we get some champion rebalances. So I will cover the multipliers in the unofficial patch notes. I won't go into it in here, but just to note that only the bomb damage for Lord Shazar has changed. Venus, the effect change here is just an effect change from 50% to 175%, making her 100% when booked. That's the important part. She now guarantees to place HP burn. That's really powerful. Lugan, the Steadfast, makes him now a viable ally protector, albeit quite low down the tier list. He doesn't really bring AoE increased defense, where someone like Tyrant or Vasulf the Grim does. and some of the newer champions as well do. I think Kira the Watcher does ally protection and increased defense. So he's still a bit of a B tier protector, but at least he does it now more regularly, and he's got a little bit of healing. And they've also made it so you can focus on HP, although this does reduce his damage potential. Constantine, I'm very happy for. This is a big change because now I can actually use him without Vlad and block revives on people like Rotus, on people like Duchess, on people like Siphi, on people like Kaimar, Kandrathon. These meta champions that are used regularly. Hefrak, the new champion there. We can block revive, and that means they're dead. And we don't need anyone else to do it. Vlad now just makes every champion block revive. This is a great change. This makes Constantine, already a hard hitter, much better for utility and usability. He's only got one AoE, so really you're relying either on that single target A3 to kill someone if it's a Duchess, or you really want the AoE to take that one champion out. That's the win condition. This is a big change. Cupidus, you know, if you've watched Hellhades' video, he's +4'd him. He's probably a very happy bunny right now. This damage changes is pretty big. He gets a straight 25% more damage now, much more reliable, always counterattacks with Venus. He still kind of needs Venus to be really powerful. Venus enables him. So you definitely still want to have that pairing, but you can use him independently now. He's an AoE HP burn 100%. That's really, really powerful for places like Hydra. Jingwong, I don't know if I've covered this at all, but effectively Jingwong is still kind of useless. His A2 is now the best part of his kit. It guarantees that you can kind of extend those debuffs on a 2-1 ratio 100% of the time. That's pretty cool. It's not quite as strong as Vizier, but it is decent enough that he's probably like the second best, maybe the third best extender in the game now for that A2. The passive with a 4-turn cooldown is just pointless. If Plarium really wants to make that passive a thing, they can reword it in a raid digest as much as they really want. But whilst it has a 4-turn cooldown, it is useless in high-end arena because it's not enough. It needs to be more regular. The fact that you can sleep with a Kaimar and then just reset and go again, it doesn't make enough of a difference that it's a 4-turn cooldown instant block debuff, because I can just do a Kaimar Ceres combo and then it's easy. These things need to not have a cooldown. A Shamael-like passive is where it's powerful. Shamael's powerful because he always does it without a cooldown, removes the fear. Fear is now not a thing. That's powerful. This is a Void legendary, and it has got a 4-turn cooldown. It's not enough. Okay, other fixes here. Houndspawn Shattering Strike now ignores block damage when under freeze. I guess it didn't. I don't know why. Fixed a bug that caused battle results in the battle log to be displayed incorrectly in Tag Arena. Okay. Fixed a bug that caused damage inflicted by other debuffs to be affected by damage increases from skills. What is the word in here? Fixed a bug that caused the damage inflicted by buffs or debuffs to be affected by damage increases from skill upgrades of the skills that place the debuffs. Right. If anyone can figure out what that means, let me know in the comments below. But to me, that sounds like something weird was happening in some bugs. I haven't seen anything in the code related to that, so that must be something within the brain of the game. Very unusual. Fixed an error that showed when claiming rewards for CVC. Okay, that's just a visual bug, visual bug, visual bug, visual bug. So just some visual bugs there. That 0.3, I'm not really sure what that means. And then obviously we've got all those changes. So let's head over to the unofficial part and take a look at all the stuff they didn't tell you about. So as ever with the unofficial patch note side of things, I do put a disclaimer here to say this is unofficial. So this basically means that it's information that I've acquired from within the game code. It's accurate to our understanding of how the game operates. The multipliers here are very accurate. They're very specific. We've data mined hundreds of champions at this point. However, there may be some elements in here that are subject to change, especially if I'm previewing anything in the future that isn't yet quite released in the game. So with that set aside, let's get started and take a look at some of these changes. The first thing I want to touch on is Hex and the detail behind this change. So we now know that any champion that is hexed, any enemy, and you attack an enemy, those champions that are hexed will now take damage based on the damage that you dealt to that original enemy. So if you hit that original enemy with a single target, it should send 10% of that damage to all hexed enemies. If you hit for an AoE, it will do 2%, but it is for each hit. So if you've got a 5-enemy wave, and you hit 5 enemies, effectively one hex champion will get 4 2% in a row, because obviously you can't, the target you initially hit can't hex itself. So it's 4 2% hits. So it is slightly weaker, but it still roughly works out around about 10% for AoE as well, because of the way that it multiplies and stacks. Now, the important thing to note here through testing is This doesn't allow for excessive damage, and it doesn't allow for anything that is like shielded or life barriered. If you attack a shielded target, you will not do any damage on Hex. It really is 10% not of the damage you deal, but 10% of the HP that you remove from the target, or 2% for an AoE hit. So that basically means if an enemy is on 1000 HP, the most you can put on a Hex target is 100. Even if you hit that 1000 HP remaining enemy for 100,000, it will still only Hex for 100 because you can only remove 1000 and it will only take 10% of what the HP that you remove from the enemy. So that's important to consider if you are looking to maximize or use the Hex mechanic. It has to be HP removed. Shielded targets will not work. Life barrier being a shield is probably the same thing. Anything on 1% will block damage will not do any sort of transfer, even if the other champions don't have block damage, because you cannot deal damage, you haven't removed any HP. They have adjusted the Doom Tower bosses so that the Hex will work on those with allies, such as Agrath, such as the Eternal Dragon. When there were allies out, you could Hex those allies, hit the boss for a lot of damage, and those allies will take Hex damage. As Hex has also been upgraded, they have also reduced the damage you receive in Minotaur. So the multipliers of the Minotaur skills have been reduced by around about 10% across the board. I think one of the multipliers has gone from 3 down to 2.7. This is probably to account for the fact that he does Hex himself, and obviously he's going to spread the damage out. So they're probably thinking the Hex is there 10%. Let's match the Hex so that you're not receiving any more additional damage in Minotaur. So the first of our champion updates here, we've got Lord Shazar. His bomb multiplier is going from 3.2 to 4.2. Now, this is not really a significant enough change to sort of affect his bombs, and I will show you a comparison between all the bomb champions now so you can see the kind of impact this change does. A few videos ago, I did a comparison of all the bomb champions, and I kind of built them out in sort of ideal builds in terms of the stats they required. Do they need accuracy? Do they need speed? Do they need crit rate? Obviously, Shazar has a more expensive build because he requires 100% crit rate for you to get that 1-turn bombs. You could decide to go with 2-turn bombs, but then the likelihood is they're going to get cleansed because there is no mechanic to sleep targets that you get with Gaius. Based on 3.2, Shazar's bombs, without any extra sort of additional attack buffs or weaken, would do around about 23,974, which is obviously significantly lower than the best, which is War Mother on a boss, or say Astrolith or Gaius or War Mother on normal champions, which are around about the 45 to 49,000. If we increase him to 4.2, which is the change, we can see he improves, but he is still significantly below the sort of meta bomb champions here, and obviously lacks a lot of the utility that you get with someone like Gaius, someone like Astrolith, who can place it without requiring accuracy. So it basically makes him better, but not that good still. I still think he's one of the worst bomb champions, even though technically his kit is one of the best because he gives himself that increased attack. He gives himself the 1-turn bombs with crit rate. It just means that because his multiplier is still, 0.8 below everyone else's, it's not like he's got a matching equal bomb multiplier. Really, what we needed to see here is probably a 6.2. Put him a 6.2. Now Shazar is in the S tier range. At 4.2, it's still not enough, so it needs a bit more work. Lugan the Steadfast, nothing really much has changed apart from the cooldowns, but they did make the A3 go from 5 times attack to a 0.26 times HP. This actually makes his damage on his A3 less. Not that I would imagine many people were using as a nuclear, but a 5 times attack was pretty decent, even if he didn't have a very good base attack. It does mean that you can build him more linearly now with HP, and as a protector, it makes his kit feel more sense. But in terms of actual damage dealing, this is actually technically a nerf for his damage ability. But hey, it's a HP-based nuker. They're not normally that very powerful. Cubitus changes. The big change here is obviously the A2 went from a random 3-hitter to a single AoE hit. So they have adjusted the multiplier accordingly. 2.1 times attack has gone to a 4 times AoE. That's actually really quite strong for an AoE. That's on the sort of mid to high range of an AoE multiplier. It's not obviously a 6-time Trunders or the new Hefrax 3.6 times 2. Those multipliers are really, really high. but as a 4 times, that's a typical average AoE nuke. So if you've got a Hubris with Venus, that's 25% more damage. It really boosts the damage up a lot more. What we're going to do at the end of this video, by the way, if you've been watching so far, is we're going to have a quick look at sort of the internal numbers in the comparison charts for damage that I run, and we can have a look where these new champions kind of rank in terms of damage. Obviously, I will go through what we rate them as, but sometimes it's helpful to look at them in comparison. So the first of the new champions here is Kira the Watcher, very much a protector style champion. Both dwarves in this update are defense based. 1409 is a typical, what I would call a typical range for a defense now. Anything like 15 plus is really strong. 14 is a pretty good range. 104 speed is decent. And her attacks are strong. 3.6 on the A1 and 3.8. Does have an AoE, not going to be top tier nuker, but is a pretty decent damage output for this champion. Goffred Brassclad, obviously a double hit on the A1. The good thing about this guy is 100% stun on an AoE. Again, similar kind of base defense numbers, about 102 speed, pretty fast. You're using him mainly as control. That if you pull him, he is like Astralon, he's the 100% AoE stun guaranteed. Again, damage multipliers are strong, nothing insane, nothing godlike. Typical for defense-based. I think this champion is decent, but nothing necessarily that would make me tear my eyes out and go really happy for. Now, the first champion that I'm really excited for, Shemnath. Shemnath for me has a lot of potential. Shemnath has that really cool passive where you can ramp up his crit damage based on the number of enemy debuffs that are out there. Now, obviously for Clan Boss, that's basically 50% more crit damage when you get it to a 10 stack, which is quite possible with Double Toxic. You don't need a Vizier necessarily extending to really get that. You'll have variability in damage, but he will hit pretty hard. Now, his damage is based on, the way we've calculated this, we've assumed a 25% crit damage passive. That is around about 5 debuffs out on the team. It's 5 debuffs in one against the clan boss, or 5 debuffs across all sort of 5 champions. That can be 2 on average. That's a pretty reasonable assessment. You could easily calculate it higher, but the damage here is based on 25% extra crit damage. So we've got a double hit A1, 1.5 times attack, and that is strong. It's not quite godlike. It was close, but not quite, but it's on the border. All of those strong skills here are on the border. His A2 is a triple hit, 1.8 times attack, 3 hits, and we also have all those additional effects. Extends his own debuffs, extends his own buffs, sorry, extends the enemy debuffs. You will need accuracy for that. That will reduce your damage slightly, but it is a really, really cool A2. The A3, where it's really interesting, he has a double hit, 2.5 times attack. That is a 5 times attack. Now, the key thing here is you kind of want to get rid of the buffs. It's a bit awkward. Accuracy is a bit of an issue. Now, you don't necessarily have to use his ability here to remove all buffs. You could preempt or go before with a Madame Cerise or a Kaima or someone to basically remove all those buffs. If you do that, the second hit, 20% ignore defense. That's 20% with 15%. If you imagine you've got Savage or Lethal, that's another 25%. You're already at 45%. Cruel makes it 50%. Helm Smasher, 75%. You can really get that second hit hitting it really hard. Plus, you're going to take the HP down quite low, which means that you're going to be activating a lot of those mechanics. The other thing about that A3, it's like all conditional based A2s, double hitters. I think this champion is really cool. It's an interesting passive. It is cool designs in terms of the way that he multi-hits. You'd probably want to run this guy in Giant Slayer. He'll average enough hits over the fight so that it makes Giant Slayer worth. He also looks freaking cool, and I've heard some of the animations are really cool on this guy. He is now in my top 5 champions that I really would like to get in the game. Next up, we have kind of like the worst champion of the bunch, in my opinion, Truath. It's a HP-based kind of an I don't know really the words. Basically, it's just a healer. That's kind of what this champion does. It heals you. Doesn't really do anything else. Not really that useful, but it probably heals you pretty decently. Damage-wise, it's HP base, it's average. It's 0.2 times HP and 0.27 times HP. I'd be pretty disappointed if I pulled this champion. I wouldn't know really where I would want to use it. Maybe in Hydra, maybe in a few places, but generally it's an average new legendary. Hefrak is the champion that everyone is talking about, the new Trunda, the replacement Trunda. I'm not so convinced that it is as powerful enough to replace Trunda. It does hit harder, but not as hard and not with those additional things because of just the way that this champion works. 1553 is a really high base attack. That is in sort of the top 10%, I would say. Speed 99 is a little bit slow, but it's not too bad. We have multiple hitters. First one is a double hit. If the first hit is critical, he will hit again. Double hit conditions like this hit normally really strong. 2.2 times attack times 2 is godlike for an A1. A2 then is his special ability. 3.6 times attack, and if the enemy is below 50% HP, will hit again for another 3.6 times attack. So it becomes a 7.2 times attack ability. And also you get those additional effects in his passives. You get ignore defense on that A2. Trunda doesn't get that, but this champion does. You also get the self-buffing increase attack and increase crit rate into an extra turn on the A3. And you also get the passive where if an ally dies, so you could potentially bait that out, an ally dies, instantly activates the A2, and that doesn't put it on cooldown. So even though the champion only has one AoE, it can technically AoE multiple times. Now, I haven't seen many people test this in much detail. I've seen a few videos. Obviously, if the champion is controlled, if you put him with a Kai'Ma sleep, it will not attack. It has to be not controlled for that passive to work. It won't break that. So you still have those things that you have to consider as a challenge. Yes, it is stronger. It is around about 7% more damage than a Trunda A3, just to give you an idea. We'll have a look at the raw numbers, but it is around about 7%. You still don't have the utility that Trunda gives. Trunda has a lot more base HP. This guy's sitting at around about 14,000. Trunda's at 20 plus. She's a little bit faster than him. She also has 2 AoEs. This guy only has 1. That A2 is equally as powerful at dealing with Duchess, if not better. This guy is going to suffer from the Duchess passive. Trunda doesn't suffer the same way because of the A2, can take the Duchess out first. Although the second hit of a Heffrack, if you get them below 50%, is considered single target. It works almost exactly the same way as Senatia's A1 in the sense that because it has to check for that HP check, it will consider it a single target hit. So therefore Duchess's passive on the second hit doesn't apply. I still think Trunda is probably going to dominate Arena unless people get multiple copies of this champion, then potentially it could overcome it. But it is going to hit stronger. It is got some utility. You can mess with the Arena meta a little bit. And it's good to see that we're getting more champions on the same level as Trunda. Next up, we've got the Lion, the Ragash, defense-based. I would argue this guy is probably the easiest defense-based nuker outside of Solus. So this is the best one out there. Better than Tutora, better than Drexar, better than all the other champions here. 1443 base defense. Again, that's pretty average now for a defense-based champion of this quality. 102 speed is good. We've got a double hit A1, which gives himself the increased defense buff. The biggest challenge we had with people like Solus is they need setup, and there are not that many good defense buff champions that can set these champions up. Siphi is probably the main one. You do have Doom Screech, but he's kind of useless outside of that. Really, it's kind of like you don't go defense-based nuking unless you have a Siphi. This guy doesn't need a defense buff. He can set himself up if you can set up the conditions to allow him to A1 into A2. The A2 is a 4.3 times defense. It is godlike. It does hit really hard. This champion, if you pull him, can easily beat your nuker all the way up to gold 5. He might even be able to compete in Platinum. I think this champion is a very good addition to the game, although I'm not too pleased in terms of the affinity because there is already quite a lot of spirit-based nukers on that faction. However, he does place things before he attacks, so that means you can get away with the fact that he's a bad affinity for the sort of faction wars waves that we have to fight in there. So overall, Lion is a great champion. Next up, we've got Nekmo Thar. This is a classic example of a champion. When you read each skill individually, you think this is great, this is cool, we can do some new clan boss things with this, guys. And then you see the passive and it ruins every plan and it becomes almost a useless champion because of that passive. So we're going to have a look at this now. He's a support-based champion, so he doesn't deal damage, a sort of a typical attack-based nuker. He is attack-based though. So his A1 is a 1.8 times attack. It is AoE, so you can put him in a stun set. You can do whatever you want with him. And it is a weak hit. A2 is in 3.1 times attack. And again, it's because his base attack is quite low, the damage is quite low as well. So that is an average. The reason why I'm disappointed that this champion has the passive is because, now this guy has decreased attack on an A1, really nice, but more importantly, he has increased speed on all allies and then fills the turn meters by 30%, and then grants an extra turn. So effectively, it's a 3-turn cooldown increased speed, which is most important. The fact that it is 3 turns makes it viable for 2-1 or a 3-1 rotation. If it was a 4-turn cooldown, it becomes a little bit more problematic. This is the main reason why Frostbringer, which does increase speed and increase attack, is not used in any tunes that often, is because it's a 4-turn cooldown, not a 3-turn. But this is awesome, this ability, because he also has decreased attack, which is pretty much 75% against a debuff target, so it's a pretty high chance. And he also has decreased speed and leech now. So for Clan Boss, the leech is relevant, the decreased speed is not. But the problem is, he's got an all battles aura. You're thinking this is great, Clan Boss. And then you see this passive. Fills this champion's turn meter by 5% each time a debuff on an enemy is removed, transferred, or expired. The only way you can make this passive work is if the debuff never expires. And the only way you can do that is if you have Vizier. And trying to get that set up where you get lots and lots of extensions early on in a tune so that this never becomes a problem is going to be very, very difficult. However, he is still a phenomenal champion for Hydra support. AoE decreased speed is massive in Hydra. It is huge. It is so valuable. Increased speed and turn meter for all allies is massive in Hydra. Keeps you going faster, gets you more attacks in between the Hydra head attacks so you can get more damage out there. Decrease attack on an AoE. That is huge for Hydra. This champion is a monster for keeping your team going alive fast and trying to slow the enemy down. I think he's very powerful. If you pull him, you can do a lot of cool stuff. I'm sure the Dead with Jedi community will come up with some interesting tunes where we can use Vizier with this fill speed to create 2-1 and 3-1 teams. But it is going to be a pain in the backside. Why this is here is so frustrating. It doesn't really benefit you that much. I would have removed it completely and given him a different passive altogether. But this passive here just creates problems we didn't need to have. So finally, we have the Fusion Champion. By now, you've probably seen loads of videos on this guy. You either going for him or you're not. He has a very, very good base HP, 23,130. That's quite high. 99 speed's a bit low. He is designed to be more of he doesn't hit really hard, but he's designed to kind of do damage in other ways through the HP burn mainly. So the A1 is 0.11 times HP times 2 hits. That's quite strong for HP-based damage dealer. And for A1s, that's quite good. It also activates HP burn. Now, I'm not factoring in the damage from HP burn here. This is only on hit damage. So you have to remember that when you're looking at this thinking, okay, well, what about the HP burn damage? Surely that must add in. It does, but it's really difficult to equate because it's based on targets. It's based on different things. I don't really calculate that in. A2 is an AoE, 0.23 times HP. Irresistible HP burn, quite nice. And then we've got a really funky A3, which does exchange in HP and all this kind of thing. And then it does a 0.35 times HP. It will do an ignore defense component if certain conditions are met. I think we are factoring that in here, but it's still an average hit. It's nothing going to be crazy because he's HP based. He is still pretty solid as a champion. I don't really rate him that much personally because I think there are plenty of AoE HP burn champions out there now that do it better potentially. For example, we've got Mordecai that can place the burn without actually doing any damage, which means he can get around Poison Cloud. You've got Akoth is still a decent AoE HP burn. You've still got Ignatius that can do that AoE irresistible HP burn. And you've got Drex passive as well. So there's lots of champions you get given that can potentially do what this guy does. But it's nice he activates it on A1. So you might do a lot of damage in Hydra. He might do a lot of damage in other areas. But for me personally, I'm going for him. But I'm not as super excited maybe as other creators because I just think he may be a bit of a glorified HP burn champion. So finally, some little previews coming up. There is going to be a new legendary login champion after Lady Arash. This is the champion preview that we have here. So looks pretty grim, I would say. I'm not really sure what faction. It could be Undead Horde something, but it looks a bit, yeah. We've got some skill icons here to have a look at. Looks like something that could be targeting accuracy there. maybe some sort of drain, some shield breaking going on. I've tended to be happy to release this kind of information because things could change in the future, but I'm not giving any away information here. I'm giving some pictures that are in the game asset library. This champion will be a legendary, so therefore it will take you 4 months to get, and it will be on along the similar trend as how long it took to get Cleopteryx and Gerda Bogbrew. Let's hope that this champion's skill and kit is a little bit better than those other champions. We also have some new portraits and skills for champions not released in the game. We have got the, some sort of brawler guy here with 2 swords on an icon. So obviously a dual wielder with lots of damage. And then we've got, I would imagine, another Shadowkin there with a pretty cool mask, purpley feel to it. Looks like some sort of cooldown reduction, hopefully from the spyglass. Maybe it's a champion that does another cooldown reduction. We don't get many of those. There's still only a few champions in the game. I think 4 or 5 that can reduce skill cooldowns. We need more of those. So I have no information about what they do other than these preview pictures, and I don't know whether they're even going to make it into the game or when they come in, but they are assets that have been generated. They're in the library, so we might see these champions come up at some point in the near future. Nekmothar, for example, was previewed in the game code around about 3 months ago, something like that. So they definitely do plan to release these champions at some point, but we are probably not going to expect these champions just yet. So what I want to just quickly do now is to kind of take a look at some of the comparison numbers effectively with the new champions we've got here. First thing I want to kind of do is kind of look at the defense-based nukers we have here. So this is the AoE kind of damage tier list. I've sorted it by a target being hit for, say, 2,500 defense, just to give you kind of a ballpark of what kind of damage we're comparing here. And we can see quite clearly that Solus, doesn't require any setup like Deathless does, is kind of the best sort of defense-based nuker. But Drex is now there at 20,000, not too bad. But you notice that Ragash has now made an appearance here at 20,430. Now, Ragash here basically means he's probably the second best defensive nuker in the game, along with Drex there. Drex, I think there's some weird conditions to make his damage work or in that sense. But generally, people don't use Drex for nuking, but he can do it. But Ragash now means that he is probably the second best defense-based nuker in the game. Where do we see, there we go, Kira and Gothfred? You can see the reason why Ragash is godlike and these two are not godlike. They are about 4,000 damage lower than the Kira and the Gothfred. Obviously, Ragash has that passive that gains some damage based on the fact the enemy target has less defense. So I'm considering him in a PvP setting here. The likelihood is he's going to have more defense than the enemy if you've set it up correctly, making him basically have 20% more damage over someone like Kira and Gothfred Brassclad. In terms of where they match up in single target, obviously Kyoku is the strongest single target because of the triple hit condition. Deathless here, still coming in strong. Torment the Cold, I think it's a pretty weird setup. Solus, Altan's damage, we know he hits really hard along with Razin. We've got some Padma damage here. These are all single target abilities. Tyrell, Brain Beast, Grimskin, Iron Brago, Balthus, Drauglord. Obviously, these champions are thinking, wow, why are these up here? This is only defense-based nukers. These damage numbers are actually quite low when comparing it to other single-target attack-based damage dealers. But we can see none of the champions here really make it in to this top-line list. Ragash here does. That's his AoE. Obviously, AoEs are considered weaker than sort of single target. So those are the defense-based nukers. Let's take a look at some of the newer champions in comparison to other champions. So I've pulled out the champions that have received a buff or have been added to the game, compared it against a couple of other high-end damage dealers. We've got Herndig in the mix. We've got Ethos. I've put in Ruel, the Huntsman, as well, as one of the strongest damage dealers, just so we can kind of get a comparison of where these champions sit now. So we can still see that Ruel, the Huntsman, because of his very strong passive more than anything else, and also the fact he double hits on Hex targets, he still sits pretty significantly higher than everyone else. 46,134 versus the next closest, which is 34,869 when it comes to sort of damage here as a comparison. We are still on these singles, so we'll just take a look at AoE first, I think. So when we look at just the AoEs here, you can see that, Ruel, 46,134, Hefrak, the new Demon Spawn, 33,000. That is still a significant difference in damage. If you can set Ruel up, you can keep the Hex out on every champion. He is still pretty strong, probably stronger than the rest of them. His passive was also extremely underrated, considering he can place Hex. The passive will do the Hex on the passive is 10% more damage. Now you've got the Hex Changes as well. He's very good for PvE content, helping your Seer deal a lot more damage with a lot less buffs. Heffrak comes in at 33,000, which is only just stronger than Trunda. It's around about 7% stronger. There's a few conditions here that make this difference. Yes, Heffrak gets more multiplier. Yes, Heffrak gets more ignore defense. But it's also, I think, around about 10% less book damage than Trunda gets. And Trunda has about 50 more base attack. Plus, as I said before, Trunda's a lot more tankier still. 22,800 HP versus 14,000. You're going to keep Trunda alive a lot more than this Heffrak if you need to. So the 7% is an interesting trade-off. Do I think it's necessarily better? No. Now, the other thing that someone mentioned to me was, okay, but Heffrak gets the increased crit rate buff. The problem is if you build Heffrak to not have a 100% crit rate, relying on that buff, and that buff then gets removed for whatever reason, maybe there's a weird mechanic mix-up in the turn meter, Arbiter gets array 2 off, now you don't have increased crit rate, it can cause a problem. So I probably would never build Heffrak unless... with the consideration for that crit buff, I would build it 100% crit rate to be safe, to be guaranteed. And that's how I've calculated this here. You could potentially get more damage if you did that. You just run a higher risk build. Constantine then still sits at 26,138. They didn't change his multiplier, but they changed his utility. He is probably as good as Trunda in the right scenario. This is his AoE. Then we've got Shemnath, the one I'm most excited about in this update. 25,909. That's strong enough to be a decent nuke. That's good enough at 29,909. Okay, the utility is not there. There's not a double AoE. There's no block revive mechanics. But hey, it could be a fun little thing to build out. Ethos then, you can clearly start seeing now jumping down the numbers. We've gone from 25,909 to 22,000. And then we get Cupidus's A2 now at 21,000. So Cupidus can nuke as good as Ethos, but he's still a good tier below your Ruels, your Heffraks, your Trundas, your Constantine, your Shemnath. There's still quite a lot more damage in that. Now, obviously, if you run Cupidus with Venus, he's going to get 25% more damage on that A2. That does jump him up to a Constantine level. So Venus enables his kit a lot more than without her. If you just run Cupidus on your own, he's probably not going to hit hard enough. Then we get Herndig around 17,000. Gembo, a popular champion for nuking as an epic, 16,000. And then we also get Cupidus's other AoE, which I think is his A1 at 16,000. But again, 25% more on the passive. And also he'll get 15% if they've got any debuffs on as well, I think, on that A1. So he does get a big chunk of damage on the A1. That's probably not being accounted for here because I'm assuming the Venus is not paired up with it. It's, you know, it's one of those situations. Can you get a Void Legendary on top of the others? It's questionable. In terms of a single target, obviously the AoEs are built in here as well. We've got Cupidus on his A3 hits really hard, 34,000. It's a pretty strong hit. Heffrak's AoE, then we get Trunda's A3 and A2 here. Obviously, the A2 is single target into AoE. The A3 here is the single target component. Even though A3 is a double hit, it's coded here as single target as well. So it's a little bit funky there. We've also got Constantine's A1, which hits for 29,000 because it's a double hit. And we've also got his A3 for 28. Constantine A3 is really quite powerful. It gets rid of debuffs before he attacks, so it makes it very possible for you to hit really hard on a single target. If he kills that target, it resets the A3 cooldown. He's more than just a single sort of A2 AoE nuke. He's got a lot into his kit, basically. Got Herndig's A3, and then we get Shemnath's A2 here at 25,000, and the A3 still there. So Shemnath's A3 AoE hits harder than his A2, and yeah, so you can compare all these numbers. So you can see that the new champions actually have shaked up the damage numbers quite a bit. I will do an updated spreadsheet now for the HH website. You can find that on the champion tier list page. It's a bit out of date. It's been running there. There hasn't been that many champion changes, but now it's worth doing. We'll get an updated version for all the champions and changes up to patch 5.7. So that brings us to the end of the patch notes video. Quite a lengthy one this time. Not a lot in the unofficial patch notes. They've been pretty good lately in terms of giving us all the information, but lots of new champions, new top damage dealers for us to sort of hopefully get. The only disappointing thing is obviously these new champions get launched and people have to pull them, and you know, it's very difficult these days to get a specific champion. Hopefully I'll get Shemnath. That's the kind of one I really want out of the mix. Or Necromothai. That could be quite a cool champion to mess around with. We'll see what kind of times 10 we get this week. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Hopefully my voice is kind of held up throughout of it and it hasn't gone a bit sort of off the edge. If the audio is a little bit off this time, That's short, probably just because I'm recovering. And I will probably come to you hopefully in the next couple of weeks with some new content around Kyoku, hopefully, finally. I've been doing the masteries, been grinding her up, and I will get that video out to you soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.